Hello everyone, this is part 22 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The harsh sounds of alarms blared loudly throughout the base. A young Anbu rushed through the darkened hallways, the flaring red lights giving everything around him a much more perplexing appearance, the shadows stretching out just a bit more with every red flash. The intercoms overhead blared out with the voice of one of the automated security voices. This is a Category 7 Gamma alert. Prisoner escape, I repeat. This is a prisoner escape, cell block E26. All Anbu currently on station. Follow containment procedure 2 to 97B. Lethal force against this prisoner is not authorized. The young turtle-masked Anbu skidded to a halt as he approached the corridor that led to the cell block the disturbance was reported in. Already the sounds of battle were reaching his ears, even through the solid stone walls that separated them. His heartbeat was loud in his own ears, feet pounding the unforgiving stone path beneath his feet, his beat rushing through his veins as fear and adrenaline laced themselves within it. A sixth sense, a small little voice in the back of his mind made him take a pause. A minute pause that he himself couldn't really explain why he took, but mere seconds later, barely 2 feet in front of where he now stood, an explosion of fire and debris suddenly tore through the left side of the hallway, the body of one of his comrades against the opposite wall. A few seconds later, the force of the blast knocking him onto his back, the sounds of the world fading, leaving only the ringing in his ears and the harshness of his breathing. Slowly he stood up, dazed and shaken, his legs trembling as they struggled to hold up his weight. His eyes, hidden by the mask, landed on that of his fallen comrades. He took a single step forward in order to help him, but froze as a clawed extension which he could only describe as a foot, shrouded in a red cloak of chakra, layered with hundreds of spiky protrusions almost like a porcupine. The foot was slowly followed by a clawed hand, gripping the edges of the hole, which the owner used to pull herself forward and into his full view. The stones beneath her foot and hand now smoking as they heated up due to the close contact with the evil chakra, 4 whipping tails extending from her tailbone. The chakra seemed to have been creeping up her end when it stopped, drawing jagged borders where the chakra ended and her skin began, leaving her face completely visible. Her hair seemed to defy gravity, possibly due to her massive chakra output. The Anbu quickly drew his blade, watching as the girl turned her eyes onto him, her eyes switching from red to blue, and even to purple as she stared at him. Her eyes held a strange haunting air to them, a strange form of pleading. Begging him for some unvoiced compliance, the sound of footsteps reached their ears, the clinking of armor and metal weapons rattling loudly in the confined space they were in as 3 Anbu suddenly rushed up, behind her, placing her between them and himself. Another Anbu soon appeared at his side, the flaring of the alarm seemingly fading into the background as he stared at the young girl, watching as she looked at the assembled men before turning her now blue eyes onto him. A lone tear trailing down her face before evaporating into nothingness. "Get away," was the faint whisper that he felt reached his ears before her eyes, and the world, were veiled with red. Aberrane Shino stood on one of the towers of the city wall staring across the expanse of land that stretched out before him, separating his men, from that of the Kumo army. A mixture of ninja from Iwa, Konoha, Taki, Kusa, Am and Kiri held their positions along the recently repaired and rebuilt defenses of the city of Sakai. The young Aberrane clan head took a deep breath before he turned at the sound of footsteps, watching as the familiar purple-armored Yoshihiro stepped through the open doorway. He glanced around for a moment before his eyes settled on Shino, allowing a small smirk to form over his lips as they did, watching as the Aberrane tensed up, probably unconsciously. The older shinobi didn't let that deter him as he walked up and stood next to the Aberrane without an ounce of hesitation as he crossed his arms over his sea, looking on as Kumo set up its camp. Apparently they had brought everything they needed for a full-on siege. But, if Yoshihiro knew Zhu Liang by reputation, which he did, well, he knew the sleeping dragon was planning something. The question is what? Looking to Shino, who Yoshihiro could tell was observing him from the corner of his eyes, the aged Kage couldn't help but take a jab at the inexperienced commander. "That's a mighty big force Kumo brought out here," he commented. "You think you'll have what it takes to defend this place?" Especially considering your master won't be coming to your rescue again. Shino adjusted his glasses easily on the bridge of his nose. As long as your men follow my orders to the letter, then everything will be fine. He said before pausing. I'm sure you know the price of betraying us. Yoshihiro's smile only got wider before he threw a sideways glance at the Aburame, who tensed again at the older man's gaze. The former Tsuchikage did nothing more than a small waggle of his eyebrows before he looked off to the side again. Looks like Zhu Liang has decided to make the first move after all. He said, jerking his head a bit. Shino turned his eyes into the same direction, finding a Kumo ninja waving a white flag back and forth, several dozen feet behind him. A tent was already being put up for negotiations. The sounds of footsteps reached their ears, and this time, both men turned in time to see Yuhi Kurenai, Maito Gai, Rock Lee and Tenten all make their way through the door and form a sort of semicircle, Toyohisa quickly taking a place next to his uncle as Kurenai did the same with Shino. Shino-kun, Gai stated as he crossed his arms. You are the acting commander of this mission, but I should advise you that this, as you may have guessed, may turn out to be a trap. Shino nodded mutely. I am aware of that. It is customary for the negotiators to bring 2 or 3 bodyguards. Kurenai spoke up. If I may, I think the best group to take with you would be myself and Tenten, as we can best cover a retreat. If you must bring a third, then the only options remaining are Gai and Lee. And their skills are practically identical to one another, so either one you chose to take wouldn't matter. What? I'm not invited? Yoshihiro chuckled, his shoulders shaking with each harsh laugh as the Konoha commanding officers turned their weary eyes onto him. Of course he wouldn't be allowed to join. They all knew why Zhu Liang had chosen to come here, though none of them said it. He wanted to coerce Iwa into an open rebellion against Naruto, and putting Yoshihiro into that tent would just be begging for trouble. He was no stranger to warfare, and he was no stranger to politics. They all needed to remember that, because if they didn't, well, he just may blindside them all. Giving a small snort, the former Tsuchikage turned and left the Konoha nins, feeling their eyes boring into his back as he did. Even so, the smirk didn't leave his lips. Yugito dully tightened the straps of her shin guards. Upon her insistence, Shizune had finally cleared her to leave the hospital, and after much frustration and stonewalling, it was the only term she knew how to describe it. She still had no idea of Akina's whereabouts, something that she could not understand why they would keep from her. She hadn't even seen Tsunade, or Zhu Liang since she woke up. Though Shizune said that Tsunade was extremely busy, which she didn't doubt considering the state of the village, and that Liang had left for Iwa before she even woke up. She breathed a heavy sigh, her shoulders slumping in something akin to defeat. There was some veil around her, some drape that had seemingly fallen over the village, over the people she knew, over her friends, members of the Junin and Anbu departments that had come to visit, while she had been asleep. She didn't know why, or what exactly it was, but there was this indescribable trepidation that gripped all of them, in their voices, their movements around her. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was a sense of caution that seemed to breathe from it. The door to her room opened, revealing the all too familiar gentle face of Shizune as she entered the room. Her black hair and dark blue kimono contrasting sharply against the pristine white walls of the hospital. The medic woman smiled, her eyes closing as she did before looking at Yugito, appraising her as she let her eyes travel up and down her form before nodding approvingly. Well, I really don't want you to be going out there so soon, but I suppose I can't stop you, can I? Yugito moved to shake her head when she paused. I'll tell you what, I'll stay at the hospital for as long as you want me to, as long as you tell me just where Akina is, or at least what happened to her. Shizune tensed for a moment before shaking her head. She had been wondering that as well, but all Liang and Tsunade had told her was that she was being treated at a private location and that they couldn't, or wouldn't say any more than that. But she didn't think it would be best to tell Yugito that. She could bring it up with Tsunade or Liang when he came back. Since they were the ones who knew everything about it, they would be the best ones to answer. I'm sorry, Yugito, but you know the answer to that. Yugito's fingernails dug into the wooden surface of the small table rounding on the medic, prepared to grab her by her kimono and shake whatever answers she wanted out of her. Not a very thought-out course of action, but all these, I don't knows, and, I can't tell yous, were bringing her to the brink of violence. But before Yugito could take action, however, a sudden wave of chakra washed over the both of them, flaring their senses to life. Shizune apparently felt it as well, seeing how she tensed and her eyes traveled over to the window. The two glanced at each other before running up to the roof of the hospital. Being only 2 floors below it, it was a quick run. And soon the two women were standing on the gravel-covered roof of the hospital. Watching as black smoke rose high in the distance, over the peaks of the stone mountains to the west nearly 20 miles away from the village, even so the feel of that chakra was unmistakable and Yugito didn't hesitate before leaping from the rooftop, falling to the ruble-covered street below ignoring Shizune's call for her to wait, rushing through the crowds of people who stood watching with various expressions of curiosity to worry as they saw the smoke rising to the west. Be burned like acid in her tea, rising like vomit as she hunched forward and coughed, the crimson liquid bursting from her lips, her teeth clenching with pain as her vision blurred. The burning remains of the Anbu base she had been held in crackling behind her as the fire burned the wood. The harsh orange glow shining hard against her back. The heat of the flames, however, was incomparable to the burning agony that was the chakra that currently clung to her like a second skin, hazing her mind with agony, suffocating her, making every breath be as if she was breathing fire down her tea. Somewhere in her pain-filled mind, she recognized that she needed to run. That she had to get away from this place. That soon more would arrive, and that she couldn't fight them all. She ignored her throbbing muscles as she pulled herself onto 2 legs, stumbling for a moment before she regained her full balance. She always knew the 4th tail would be draining both physically and mentally, but she never expected this. And she couldn't stop the flow. Even if she hadn't starved herself these last 2 days in order to make sure she wasn't drugged, she doubted she would be able to just keep moving once she stopped the flow of power. But she had starved herself, and as such she wouldn't be surprised if the moment she see off the flow she would fall unconscious. Fixing her eyes in the general direction she wished to take, she ran, fighting against the instinct to go on all fours as her now clawed feet crunched down stone and gravel as she made her escape from Kumo. Smoke hung heavily in the air of the war tent Shino stepped into, the 4 corners of which held torches, giving the inside an orange-brown glow, perpetuated only by the mahogany table in the center of the tent, at the end of which sat Zhu Liang. His white robes reflecting off some of the light of the torches, making him seemingly shine in the slightly darker tent. Zhu Liang stood as Shino entered the tent, at his side 2 Kumo Anbu tensed a bit, preparing for anything that the Konoha ninja may try, but Zhu Liang wasn't concerned about that. Bowing his head, the Raikage decided to greet the clan head. Aburame-san, I presume. Shino nodded, bowing his head to the Raikage as Tenten and Kurenai stepped into the tent behind him. Raikage Dono. Shino greeted back. Liang looked at the 2 women at Shino's side. If I may question, Aburame-san. Where is Yoshihiro Dono? I would imagine he would be here to defend Sakai, seeing as how he did such a good job defending it from your earlier attacks. Shino's eyes narrowed. No, I'm afraid Yoshihiro will not be joining us in this negotiation. Or in any to follow after this. Zhu Liang took a deep breath. Well then, I'm afraid what I have to say is for his ears, not yours, Aburame-san. Well then, I'm afraid your words will go unheard then, Raikage Dono. Shino shot back. Oh, I don't know about that. A voice suddenly spoke up before the earth beneath Shino, Kurenai's and Tenten's feet turned to mud and the 3, now struggling Konoha ninja, were encased in a mud cocoon, which quickly hardened, leaving them exposed from the end up. Tenten yelled as she struggled, conveying her comrade's emotions quite strongly with her statement as she thrashed and struggled within her imprisonment. A boulder sprouted up from the ground to Liang's left and Shino's right, crumbling to pieces, revealing none other than Yoshihiro Shimazu as he dusted himself off from the rubble and stones. Looking to his struggling prisoners and over to Zhu Liang before he allowed that familiar smirk to form over his lips. Well now, I'm listening. Zhu Liang allowed a strange cross between a smirk and a smile over his features before he spoke, quickly and to the point. I have heard of what has been done to your young nephew Toyohisa, the seal that keeps him and you as to the Uzumaki boy. Yoshihiro nodded. Yeah, get to the point, he said before jerking his head back towards the general direction of Sakai. They'll realize I'm gone soon enough. Zhu Liang nodded. My seal masters have studied both the Hyuga curse seal, and different seals we know the Uzumaki boy drew his design from, and they have given me this. He paused, reaching into his robe and pulling out a scroll with a seal design on it. From what we know he used, and the effects his seal reportedly has on young Toyohisa, we were able to determine what his design is, and how to nullify it, allowing you to take your revenge against the Uzumaki for his deception. Yoshihiro smirked before he made a single seal, and another boulder sprouted from the ground across the table from him, crumbling away, revealing an unconscious Toyohisa. Shino's eyes narrowed. I don't understand, how is Toyohisa not S? You are betraying us. Yoshihiro smiled. You should read the fine print, boy. The Uzumaki designed his seal so that if Toyohisa, knowingly, tried to betray, or allowed someone to try and betray him, then he would S. But Toyohisa can't know anything. I've had him unconscious for the last 2 days. So your seal will do nothing. Shino gritted his teeth, commanding his insects to eat away at the chakra around his earth cocoon faster. But apparently Yoshihiro had prepared for this and had literally soaked the earth he'd manipulated with chakra. It would take at least another 3 minutes before he'd be able to break out of this. Yoshihiro smirked, feeling the boy's efforts before he looked to Liang. Well, get to it, he said, gesturing to the unconscious Toyohisa. Liang nodded before walking over to Toyohisa, placing his palm on the scroll, over the seal designed on it. There was a surge of chakra before his hand glowed with white fire. Liang formed a quick series of hand seals before he used a small blade of wind chakra to see open Toyohisa's shirt and vest, revealing the seal over his sea. Placing his palm on the seal, Yoshihiro watched in satisfied astonishment as the ink faded, the white flames around his palm turning purple as it absorbed more and more of the seal. Finally the seal fully faded and the, now purple, flames formed themselves into a ball in Liang's hand before fading off into nothingness. Throughout the entire process Toyohisa did not even move, remaining unconscious as the seal was seemingly disintegrated. Turning to Yoshihiro, Liang nodded. Very good. Now, then, he said before turning his eyes onto Shino, Kurenai and Tenten. Let us rid ourselves of these. Smiling a fanged smirk, Yoshihiro hefted his war hammer off his back. Oh please. He paused, standing in front of the still apathetic Shino. Let me. He finished, looking into the boy's dark sunglasses. Yoshihiro let out a small snort out o floor before raising his hammer and bringing it down to crush the boy's skull. No. Shino. With the yells from Kurenai and Tenten, expecting to see the boy's skull crushed by the massive, blunt weapon, but just as the screams left their tea, Yoshihiro's hand stopped the metal gleaming surface of the hammer just an inch or so from Shino's skull. Liang's eyes narrowed, before throwing the table up, between himself and Yoshihiro, mere seconds before the massive war hammer through the wooden surface, into the sea of one of his Anbu bodyguards, sending him into one of the wooden beams that held up the tent, making it lean dangerously to one side. What is the meaning of this, Shimazu? Liang questioned, several wind blades whipping around his white feathered fan as he stared down the smirking Tsuchikage, watching as Tenten, Shino and Kurenai were released from their earthen prisons, with Tenten and Kurenai taking out their weapons and backing away from the former Tsuchikage, their eyes clearly gauging him like a threat as Shino's insects buzzed angrily. Yoshihiro's smile widened before he walked around the crumbled mess of splinters and wood, moving towards his downed war hammer. Well, I'm sorry, Zhuge Liang, but you see, I really was going to take your offer. I didn't even polish my armor last night, thinking that I was gonna have the greenhorn's skull and brain matter all over it today. He said, gesturing to Shino. But you see, just after you took that seal off, and just before I went through with Kei the kid, I realized that, young Toyohisa here has a daughter. A cute little girl, who I'd one day like to hear her call me grandpa. And also, he paused again as he knelt down to pick up his weapon and looking to the now angered Raikage, merely giving off a strange ironic smile at that anger directed at him. A little girl. I would like to be able to grow up in a world where she isn't forced to fight. The Tsuchikage let out a breath. And unfortunately, your offer doesn't appear to include that particular condition. Zhuge Liang's eyes narrowed into angry his fist tightening around the grip of his fan. I see, Yoshihiro. Very deceptive. Very impressive. Yoshihiro grabbed his hammer with both hands, one hand gripping the end of it, the other at about mid-length as he smirked. You forget, sleeping dragon, before I was Tsuchikage. I kill a lot of people, in a lot of different ways. He finished before raising his hammer and it down onto the floor, making hundreds of earth spikes shoot out from the ground towards the Raikage. Liang raised his fan and with a quick, but short wave a lightning bolt shot through the roof of the tent, blinding those within before knocking them back with the force of the blast. By the time Shino, Kurenai, Tenten and Yoshihiro had gotten back on their feet, the Raikage and his 2 bodyguards had vanished. Off in the distance they could already see several Konoha ninja approaching. Yoshihiro soon felt the distinct pinprick of a kunai against his tee. Looking down he found Tenten was the one currently holding the weapon. Stop. Shino's voice in. Yeah girl stop. Yoshihiro spoke up. After all, I wasn't the only one in on this. He said, the smirk still staying on his lips, watching as Tenten's eyes narrowed before looking to Shino. You knew? She questioned incredulously. Of course he knew. Yoshihiro barked with his smile still plastered firmly on his face. Even I would have flinched if that hammer was coming down on my head. He admitted before pushing Tenten's hand away and walking up to the Aburame. Though even I would like to know, just how you knew. The Tsuchikage said, his smirk slipping from his lips a bit as he stared down the Aburame clan head. Shino didn't need to answer, as Yoshihiro soon felt a tiny tickling sensation on his finger. Bringing it up to eye level he found one of Shino's tiny little insects resting on the tip. The Tsuchikage smirked before turning and walking towards Toyohisa. I suppose you're not as green as I thought you were after all. He spoke before both he and Toyohisa sank into the earth, leaving Shino to the angry stares of both Tenten and Kurenai. Akina collapsed on her knees, red smoke seething up from her body, the 4 tails of red chakra still twitching and thrashing behind her, a contrast to her exhausted state. She could hear the sound of water nearby, her blurry eyes trying to adjust as she brought them back up, looking to the general direction she could hear the water flowing from. Finding a small crystal clear creek flowing down the mountain about 10 yards away. Her knees shook as she lifted herself up to her full height. Stumbling, almost as if she was drunk, towards the gently flowing waters. Coughing once, she felt a dribble of bee escape her lips, trickling down her chin. She paid it no mind though, continuing her walk towards the stream before she collapsed onto her knees again, her legs giving out after 2 days of not eating and the current abuse they were currently sustaining due to the Kyuubi's chakra. Swallowing thickly, the young girl proceeded to drag herself the rest of the way with her claws. Finally, she made it, allowing herself to collapse into the small, 3-inch deep creek, the cool sensation of water hitting her face again revitalizing her. Opening her mouth she allowed the life-giving liquid to flow into it, swallowing greedily, relishing the sensation as it traveled down her tea. It was by far the best water she had ever had the privilege of drinking. Once burning agony that had gripped her tea and lungs seemed to vanish, the icy touch of the water driving it back. Giving new energy to the young woman after 2 days of neither eating nor drinking. She didn't lift herself up, not willing to touch the water with her hands due to the superheated chakra that covered them. Instead she simply lay there, allowing the water to cool her face and drinking down as much as she could with each gulp, allowing herself a brief rest. It was here she allowed herself to look at where she was. Guessing from her location, she was far west of Kumo, near the White Sand Mountains, which shielded Kumo from any possible attacks delivered from the northern seas. The place where she currently sat was like a giant globe of stone. The surface was smooth but held a distinct spherical curvature to it. Far in the distance she could see some more of Kumo's high mountain peaks, before those gave way to a seemingly never-ending plain, the so-called Hawarito Unabara. The White Sea, named so for the ashen white color the grass held during the day, and as the moonlight bathed down on it. Only during twilight did the color change, almost to a fiery red. But even so, it had retained the name the White Sea despite this peculiar phenomena. That was her destination, which was her borderline to freedom. Akina's brief rest was off even shorter than she intended at the sound of boots scraping on stone. Glancing over her shoulder she found the sight of one knee Yugito, breathing heavily, hair disheveled with eyes that stared at her with something akin to disbelief, laced together with questioning and a veiled sense of caution. The younger Kyuubi Jinchuriki mustered up her renewed strength, pushing herself up onto her feet once more before turning to face the older woman she would have called sister. Tushiro hefted the burgundy sack onto the back of the horse grunting, as the animal whined and shifted with the added weight. Normally, ninja had no need for horses as beasts of burden or transportation. But because they would be defending the northern border they would need to set up several garrisons, and hunting food on the border of enemy territory was dangerous and foolish. He planned to create a defensive network of 4 different garrisons that ran along the northern border. With 30 ninja in each base, Basic fortifications could be built the day they arrived, but they needed food and supplies in these garrisons, and while kunai and shuriken could be carried in the thousands through the use of sealing scrolls, organic materials, such as rice, wheat, meat and even paper could not be sealed in basic sealing scrolls. It took a much more elaborate design which could take days to make properly, and by that time they could already be at the site they needed to defend. So they would guard and operate the caravan that held 4 months' worth of food for all of them, and 6 months' worth of supplies, including shuriken, kunai, swords, explosive notes, soldier pills, medical supplies, and basic construction and woodworking equipment. Releasing a breath, the Kiri ninja wiped some sweat off his brow before he moved to fix another piece of equipment onto the horse when his effort was assisted by another pair of hands, fisting the cloth sack and lifting with him. Bringing his slightly surprised gaze upwards brought him to the sight of Ginchiko with a minor upturn of her lips as she helped him heft the sack onto the animal. Ginchiko-san. He greeted with a nod as he adjusted the sack. Just wanted to see you off. She spoke before looking around the current location. It's not good for someone to go off without at least a parting farewell from a friend. The statement was simple in itself, but Toshiro could hear what she was really saying, hear the tinge of regret in her voice, knowing that she had not done the same for Guan last time she saw him. Toshiro smiled as he rechecked the saddle straps, tightening them a bit more before turning to face the older woman, watching as she smiled a strange bittersweet type of smile before she wiped some dust off of his shoulder. You'll be taller than me soon, she commented before looking into his eyes. Take care of yourself, eh? Giving a single firm nod, the young shinobi turned commander watched as one of the chunin under his command walked over. Bowing to both Kiri ninja before speaking. Sir, the caravan is ready to move. Toshiro nodded, dismissing the chunin before turning back to Ginchiko, whose strange smile still held firm. He didn't say anything as he turned around and mounted the horse. It was brownish red in color, which somehow suited the young man's own looks and personality in her eyes. Looking at the older woman, he reached down, offering his hand, which she took in her own, gripping it firmly. He knew what she was asking of him, what she was demanding of him. He offered only another nod of his head, as he stared solemnly into her demanding brown eyes. He let his grip slip from her hand before he used it to grip the reins and turned to the others of the caravan. We ride north, and we won't be stopping until nightfall, he yelled, raising his voice so that those further away could hear him clearly. Words of agreement were heard before Toshiro pulled the reins of his horse, kicked the creature in the ribs, and made his way out of Konoha. Ginchiko watched him leave, watched him as she had watched Guan leave for so many years, and it was no child she saw riding off into the forest road. You are his son, she said to herself before slowly turning and began making her way back into the village. Yugito's wide, disbelieving eyes stared upon the visage of her surrogate sister, vile, demonic chakra clinging to her like a second skin, as 4 tails of chakra whipped and lashed out behind her. Her eyes, red, and more animal than human at this point, were darting in every direction, like a cornered beast about to lash out in whatever way it could. Her claws, for that is the only way Yugito could describe the current state of her hands, twitched. The ones on her feet dug harshly into the stone. Aki, Yugito began stepping forward, her hands held up in a placating gesture, but despite this her sentence was easily and quickly see off as one of Akina's thrashing tails lashed out, swiping the ground in front of the Nibi Jinchuriki, leaving the stone red-hot and forcing her to backpedal in order to avoid the debris caused by the attack. Akina's actions were accentuated by the harsh sound of her voice yelling out, "Get away from me." Akina took 2 steps back, feeling her chakra-covered feet enter the 3-inch deep stream. Steam quickly rose as the superheated layer of chakra came in contact with the cool liquid. Get away, she repeated, flexing her claws dangerously as she locked eyes with the startled, and still disbelieving, Yugito. The rush of adrenaline seemed to fade for a moment, and the younger woman stumbled, delirium beginning to take hold due to the lack of food and extreme strain currently placed on her body because of the massive amount of power she was pushing through it. I can't let you take me back. You won't take me back to him, you can't. Her eyes were losing focus fast. Yugito could recognize the signs that her body was beginning to shut down. First would be the current delirium she was experiencing, dizziness, spotty visions, and loss of coordination and motor functions before she would finally pass out. All she had to do was stall for time, then she could take Akina back to Kumo and figure out just what the hell had gotten into the younger woman. Look, Akina. She began slowly, matching the blonde's movements as they began circling one another, with Akina soon hunching down and prowling on all fours, looking much like an animal ready to pounce, her teeth bared, fangs and all. It's me, Yugito, she continued slowly. Don't you recognize me? Some recognition entered her hard eyes and, visibly regaining herself, the young woman spoke. She could feel Kyubi's instincts beginning to slowly overpower her weakened senses, even though the Ninetales must have been holding back his influence drastically. Such a creature's presence can only be controlled so much. Yugito, she rasped out, her tea once again growing itchy and dry as the water she had just drank was already drying up due to the burn of the Ninetales. Yugito, she repeated, let me go. You can't take me back to him. You have to let me go. Her voice was pleading now, her eyes now having fully regained their focus. What do you mean him? You mean sensei? The Nibi Jinchuriki questioned before she shook her head. Look, Akina, you're obviously very confused. Just calm down and we'll head back. No, Akina yelled, snarling, her eyes gaining a fierce harshness to them. I won't be his tool anymore, I won't let him trick me again. Don't let him do the same to you. Don't let him use you. What are you talking about? The Nibi Jinchuriki finally yelled, frustration over the last day's events and confusion over Akina's actions and words finally getting to her. Akina moved to speak again, but the sound of boots scraping against stone reached both women's ears, bringing their attention to the side as a squad of roughly 24 Anbu rushed up the mountain. Their captain, a turtle-masked Anbu, skidding to a halt. There she is, he yelled. Bring her down. Both Jinchuriki were forced to leap back as jutsu, kunai and shuriken rained down on the area they had previously occupied. Akina snarled, her eyes glowing a fierce red as the chakra around her visibly shimmered and intensified. She s both claws deep into the stone at their feet, and soon thousands of red spike-like protrusions, some ranging from a foot to 4 feet long, erupted from the rock. Ear-shattering cracks echoed through the high mountain air before the Kyubi Jinchuriki ran, instinct and adrenaline driving her now as she ran on all fours, the uninjured Anbu hot on her heels. The captain of the Anbu squad was about to follow his target and comrades when a hand wrapped firmly around his tee, swinging him back around before bringing him to face the snarling visage of Yugito. What the hell was that? The Nibi yelled in his face, her eyes shining purple as small wisps of purple fire darted over her shoulders and arms before dissipating into nothing. Standard Anbu capture and extraction procedures clearly dictate that when dealing with a ninja gone rogue, the Anbu team are to try to negotiate with the ninja at least once before hostile use is enforced. The captain gasped, trying to pry her hand away from his tee with little success. These orders have come directly from Reikage-sama. We were to attack with ghost attacks on sight. Now this, visibly startled Yugito. Her grip slackening enough on the man to allow him to slip from between her fingers as she visibly recoiled from the words as if she'd been s. The term, ghost attacks, was a common term used when describing attacks that were meant to look like they were aiming to kill an individual, but weren't meant to cause harm at all. But, why would their sensei do that? Akina, she muttered before rushing off in the direction he'd seen her and the other Anbu go. The Anbu captain watched the Nibi leave. She was an unexpected element in this mission, but of little consequence. Soon enough the pursuit Anbu would chase her to the border, where they would do as ordered and would make it seem as if she'd lost them herself. The two-way radio in his ear flared to life. Is it done? A female voice, one from Anbu HQ, reached his ears. Yay. He answered back. My men are pursuing her as we speak. She'll soon be out of Kumo, but we've run into a bit of a problem. The Nibi Jinchuriki is here, and she won't stop at the border. Then you improvise. Don't allow the Nibi outside of our borders under any circumstances. Right. The captain nodded before switching off the radio and running after the two women and his squad. Instinct was all that was driving her now, the feel of her heart thudding powerfully in her sea as her legs propelled her forward, burning with the strain. She swerved and weaved to avoid the attacks from her pursuers, volleys of jutsu, ranging from lightning to wind and fire. The explosions deafened her, making her ears ring and her bones rattle with the force of their impact. The incline of the mountain increased, the smooth surface slowly giving way to jagged rock as she scaled the mountainside, the hard stone crunching and cracking beneath her claws as she rose up, higher and higher, pulling herself up to the ledge, only to come to a swift halt as she was met with the sight of a drop, at the bottom of which were the waves of the North Sea against the unyielding stone of the cliff face. Turning around, she was greeted by the sight of the pursuing Anbu slowly encroaching on her. There's nowhere to run now. Come with us back to the village, and I'm sure the Raikage will grant you a light sentence. One of the Anbu placated, running through scenarios in his mind where one of his men would slip up and allow her to escape while escorting her back to the village. Akina's lips curled back, a snarl slipping its way through her clenched teeth as she looked around, hoping to find some means of escape. But with her back to the cliff, and in front the Anbu, there was little hope of that, and she did not have the energy to fight them in this state. Then, she caught sight of Yugito as she pulled herself up, above the edge of the mountain. The older Junan's gaze finding her own before Akina snarled at her pursuers one more time. I won't go back, she declared before turning on her heel and running towards the edge. Yugito's eyes widened as she realized what the younger Jinchuriki would do, mere seconds before she actually did it. Stop, she yelled as she pulled herself up over the edge, but far too late as Akina leapt off the mountain, rapidly descending to the ocean below. She felt some of the Anbu holding her back as she struggled to reach the edge. No, she heard herself cry, as she tried to push them off. She didn't know for what, because they all knew there was nothing that she could do at this point. Akina was. Her strength seemed to vanish, the realization of just what the young girl she had grown to love and care for had done striking her fully in the sea, making her stagger, as she clutched her heart. Akina. The harsh wind lashed past her face, her hair whipping out behind her as she descended, the speed making it harder to breathe, harder to keep her eyes open. But she knew, as she felt that she needed to do something to break her fall, she couldn't hit the water at these speeds, it would kill her. But her eyes and limbs felt heavy, her chakra felt sluggish and weighed down. She could feel her body giving out on her and her vision fading, darkening around the edges as the red bled out, leaving only the familiar sky blue. Worthless mortal. The dark voice of the kitsune, a harsh echo in her mind as her body fell lifelessly to the crashing waves below. Must I do everything? The voice roared and she felt her body moving on its own, righting her in mid-air, so she was falling feet first. Her hands cupped together, aiming downwards as the 4 chakra tails coiled around her so that the tips were pointing towards her palms. A small tiny orb of black chakra gathered in her palms, seemingly absorbing the light around it as chakra gathered from the 4 tails, until these began to dissipate, becoming little more than specks of red dust as she fell. Finally, as she could feel all the chakra that had previously covered her body dissipating into nothing, seemingly absorbed by the black energy in her hands. It was released, in a magnificent display of destruction. The tiny black ball hit the water's surface, exploding with the force of a modern-day missile as water rose nearly 100 feet in the air, sprinkling her as she fell and finally went beneath the waves. Her eyes burned with the salt of the ocean as she sank like a block of lead, the surface of the water getting farther and farther away from her, and she finally sank into darkness. The words of the kitsune once again echoing in her mind as she did. Foolish mortal, this will not be my grave. Temari's shoes clacked loudly against the hardwood floors of the strangely designed estate as she made her way through its foreboding halls. She had woken up in her room earlier, and with that came the realization that it was not a dream and that she was indeed a prisoner in this place, a prisoner of his. She had found a kimono, folded neatly on the countertop in her room, perfectly sized for her, something that made her feel, well, for lack of a better term, violated. Knowing that he, or someone who worked for him, had taken her measurements while she was asleep. Wearing the garment alone made her skin crawl. Alas, it was the only one he had left her, and she was not going to stay in the room where she knew there were dozens of eyes watching her every movement. She also figured it would be a good way to scout out the rest of the house in order to find a possible escape. She doubted intensely that he would make it at all easy for her. She'd have to be at the top of her game and have a great deal of luck to have a chance of escaping. So she had donned the clothing, not wanting to give whatever perverted guard a show by walking around in an open-back hospital gown. Even so, as she went into the bathroom to change, she could still feel those damn eyes on her, sending sickening tingles down her spine and her fists clenching, begging to have one of her kunai in its grasp again. When she had finally walked out of the room, she was greeted by the sight of Hyuga Hinata standing at the doorway, her pale lavender eyes as flat and cold as a stone slab. When the Hyuga clan head spoke, her voice was a slow, monotonous drawl. She gestured down both sides of the hallway. The path to your left leads to the gardens, the library and the kitchen. The path to your right leads to the scroll room, map room and conference hall. Obviously you're not allowed to go down that way, she said with a quick taunting smirk which was just as quickly suppressed, leaving her with her previous flat expression. If you do choose to go down there, rest assured that our Anbu, possibly Naruto-sama himself, would find it as grounds with which to confine you to one area of the mansion. If you do try to escape at any time, we will remove the use of your legs. Temari narrowed her eyes at the Hyuga, wishing that she could just that smug light out of her eyes. But with no weapons she may as well be fighting with one arm tied behind her back. So turning sharply to her left she began making her way down the hallway, her mind set on seeing the gardens. Wide open space, trees and foliage, it would probably be the best spot in which to make her escape once she planned it out. The sound of her footsteps was soon followed by the sound of Hinata's as the Hyuga heiress turned and followed her, standing roughly 2 steps to her right and 3 behind her. Pausing in her stride she looked over her shoulder at the Hyuga, eyes narrowing in suspicion. What's this? You're gonna be following me around everywhere I go. Hinata somehow seemed to shrug without ever moving her shoulders as she replied. It is what he assigned me to do. Temari smirked, unable to help herself. And you're the ever-obedient little bee, I see. Hinata once again seemed to shrug. As my friend Shino so adequately put, it's better to be the right hand of the devil, than in his path. And I would suggest, Miss Sabaku, that you choose your words carefully next time. Remember that the only reason you're not a guest in one of our cells down at the TID is because of Naruto Dono's good graces. That doesn't mean his subordinates feel that gracious. Her fingers clenched in frustration before she kept walking, her pace a bit faster as she made her way down the hallway. Finally, she reached the gardens, or at least they looked like gardens, seeing as how the hallway opened up into a massive yard, lined with flowers, orchids and trees native to Konoha. Of course on closer inspection she found that all of the foliage she could see were rare bases for poisons, and antidotes for poisons. My, why wasn't she surprised? Walking a bit further into the gardens her senses easily caught the presences of the Anbu, the shadows shifting in and out of her awareness. It left no doubt that she was being watched. The garden was large and the flora was dense, one could easily get lost in this place if they didn't know their way around and she certainly didn't know her way around. Not to mention any genjutsu he may have in the area. She would need to be very careful if she ever tried an escape from this location. Turning back around she made her way back into the house, ready to see if she could find another escape point. But soon enough her ears caught the sound of a third set of footsteps and, rounding the corner was the person that made the Suna Wind Mistress freeze as she saw him. Even though he was dressed in the familiar robes of a cage this time, it did little to stop her heart from pounding against her sea in fear as he approached. He met both women's gazes as he walked right past them, with Hinata offering a small incline of her head as he did. Finally, the footsteps vanished down the hall and Temari could release the breath she didn't know she was holding, realizing that her hands were trembling minutely. The feeling of being in front of him, in his very presence without even a single means of defense, not her fans, not her scrolls, none of her explosive tags or her kunai. And knowing what he was capable of, it was the single most terrifying thing she had ever felt, and still her heart felt like it would burst from her sea. Better to be the right hand of the devil. She scoffed to herself before she continued walking. Zhu Liang walked slowly, pacing back and forth on an elevated plateau above his camp. It allowed him a good view of Sakai, but he wasn't concerned with the merchant city at the moment. No, Yoshihiro's refusal to join them was surprising and would indeed prove vexing in the near future, but it was not a mortal blow to their coalition. Already fugitives and refugees from subjugated villages, such as Kusa, Oto and even Kiri had been reported to be flocking to Suna and Kumo with the hope of escaping lands controlled by Naruto and some, in the hopes of breaking that control entirely. They had already made up for most of the ninja they had lost defending their village from Naruto's earlier attack and soon would have more men than before with which to strike back at Naruto, and even with Yoshihiro's official support with him, Naruto would be forced to keep tight on the defenses of his borders. And a very close eye on Iwagakure. Then there was Akina, she was another aspect that had to be taken into consideration. Currently, unstable as she could not stay in the village, which is why he had allowed her to learn that he would leave to Iwa during this time. She was most likely already in the midst of escaping or had already done so. It was easy enough to let her go considering the options available to her once she did. Try to stay away from the conflict, side with Naruto or return to Kumo. If she chose to try and escape both sides of this conflict, which was highly possible, he would make sure this conflict found her. What's more, he would make sure that it would be Naruto who would find her, reigniting her old hatred and desire for justice against him as he destroyed once again whatever she had tried to build up away from the fires of war. It was nigh impossible that she would ever try to side with Naruto. Returning of her own free will without some prodding would be unlikely as well. But it stood a better chance. It was a plan, full of risks and relying heavily on chance, but it was the best one viable in order to keep her fighting against her brother in a stable manner. For other Jinchuriki were the only weapons Naruto could not abide. Then of course there was Temari to consider. Undoubtedly Naruto has already informed her of the attempt he'd made on her and her brother's lives, however indirect. And the moment she returned to Gaara she would tell him, and that would be the end of his alliance with Suna, and that would be the end of any hope they may have of defeating Naruto, and stopping him before his iron grip extended to the whole world. She had to be silenced, and silenced swiftly. Hopefully they would be able to find some way to slip past the guard detail Naruto had around her, both to keep her in Konoha, and to keep Hiza away from her. Then of course there was getting past Naruto himself, who would, undoubtedly try to protect the leverage he had over Gaara. Of course that in itself provided opportunity to injure Naruto himself as he tries to protect her. Something else to consider in the possibilities. The sleeping dragon paused in his stride before glancing skyward, watching as the black clouds drifted freely in the wind, blocking the moonlight as they passed beneath it. Then a sudden thought struck him, causing a contemplative light to enter his eyes. Even if we were to ultimately kill Naruto-san. Who, I wonder, is to take his place. For he is right in his ambitions. The world cannot be allowed to continue as it is, warring factions all vying for power and money. The world needed to be united under a single banner. The only reason he opposed Naruto was because someone like him. Like either one of them, they could not rule such a world, for it would be no different than the previous one, only the deaths would be those who expelled hushed whispers of dissent and dissatisfaction with his rule. Rebellion would be brimming just beyond a thin veil of happiness and satisfaction. No, that world would be no different from this one, and that he could not, no, he would not allow that. He would not let the of thousands of men, women and children be for nothing. But the world needed a leader, someone the people could identify with, someone they could follow, someone who could lead a world of peace. But where to find someone like that? That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.